In the last two classes, we learned how computations are advantageous to us, uh, how they can help us uh, in contrast to experiments and analytical solutions. We also learned a little bit about how computers work. So, continuing with that, we'll take an example today, which will also give you some insight into how to program a computer, how to achieve uh, what we want to achieve in a computer, namely how to do computations, how to write a code which performs some computation for us. So let's take an example of a program which gives us the square root of a number. So how do we find square root of a number? Well, there is some method. There can be several methods that we can use. You might have learned some method for calculating a square root manually. Okay. Let's take a simple example here. We want to find out square root of an integer, let's say. Okay. Which will make this set of instructions very simple, which we want to give to a computer. So let's list the instructions that we want to give to a computer. So at a higher level, we want to say, this is the highest level of thought, uh, square root of an integer x. Find the square root of an integer x. But this term square root is not known to a computer. Let's say what is an integer, what is x, x is not known, but let's say if we give some integer to it, it will identify it. So we need to define square root now. So at a more basic level where we need to define square root, we will write square root of this number is what? So let us give this definition. Square root of x is 1 less than the first number that you encounter as you go from 0 forward, 0, 1, 2, 3 and so on. So the first number that you encounter, let's call it y, with y squared greater than x. So the first number y that you encounter whose square is greater than x for the first time, subtract 1 from that, and that will be the square root of x. Okay, that's how we'll do it even manually. Let's say you want to find square root of 16. So what you'll do is you'll go from 0, 1, 2, 3 and so on, find the square of 2, it gives you 4, it is less than 16. Find square root of 3, it gives you 9, which is less than 16. Find square root of 4, it is 16, which is equal to 16. Okay, fine. Find square root of 5, that is 25, and which is greater than 16. So now you take the number 5, subtract 1, and that is your number, that is the square root of 16. So here you could have said that why not just say that it is equal to that number, whose the number y squared is equal to x, then we can take that number y is equal to x. Yes, that can also be done, but this code that we are writing is a bit more generic. It can give you square root of even 17, but it will give you an integer, okay, integer value. So square root of 17 will also be 4 in this case. So this code is going to return you an integer value. It is not going to give you decimals. That's the simplest example that we are taking. Okay. So now here we have defined square root, but we have introduced one more term which is called square. Okay. Here we had this term square root, which we defined in the next level, and here we introduced one more that is called squared. Now on a more basic level, we are going to define what square means. So we'll write this definition of a square. We'll say y squared is the sum of y copies of y. Okay, you sum these many copies, that is y copies of y. So 4 copies of 4, if you sum, then you will get 16. So that is y squared. Now we introduced one more term here, that is called sum. Now let us define sum at an even more basic level. So we'll say sum of y and some other number is the result of incrementing that other number y times. Okay, so if you want to say sum of y and 2, then the definition is that the sum of y and 2 is the result of incrementing 2 y times. Okay, so increment that number those many times. Incrementing means adding 1 to it. Okay, and let's stop here. Let's say that let's assume that a computer knows how to increment a number. As we have already discussed, if you have a bit, okay, let's say the value is 0, if you supply, if at this location the voltage is turned on, okay, let's say it is 5 volts or something like that here, then it becomes 1 instead of this. Okay, and this is known as incrementing that bit. So you have incremented 0 and it became 1. So let's say that this is the most basic operation and a computer knows how to do this. Alright, so we'll stop here at this level. This is the algorithm that we have written in simple words that we can understand. We have not yet written a proper code for this. Okay, these are different levels that we have written. What a square root is defined in terms of square, then square defined in terms of sum, and sum defined in terms of incrementing bits or incrementing a number. In this case, we have not yet talked about bits here. So now let us write a complete set of instructions for finding a square root based on this. All right. This may not make sense right now. If you go into the details of it, you may get a better idea of this. Let's create a diagram. Okay, with 5 boxes. All right. Now this is a set of instructions. This is an algorithm that someone may use on a very basic level. These codes may already be using it, maybe some earlier computers. So let us write the instructions. Write 0 in box 2. So first of all, the number for which you want to calculate the square root, that number you have to place in box number 1. So let's say the computer asks for some input from the user, and the user gives some number as an input, let's say 4, and let's say that is in this box 1. For our convenience, right now we are not writing in binary, we are writing in decimal numbers. Okay, so we have written 4 here. If you want to write in binary, those steps will be a little different from these. So now after you get an input in the first box, these are the instructions. Write 0 in box 2, then increment 2, write 0 in box 3, copy the number that is in 2 into box 4, if box 4 contains 0, go to step 12 below. So I'm writing these instructions from somewhere. Okay, there will be some step 12, it goes till 13 steps, and most of the codes that you will write will have a structure like this. There will be some conditions, if else conditions, there will be some loops. So okay, we'll see what a loop is in this example. So decrement 4, then if box 5 contains 0, go to step 5, decrement 5, increment the number in box 3, go to step 8, if number in 3 is not greater than number in 1, Go to step 2, decrement 2, and at this point you get the answer finally in the second box. So your answer will appear here in the second box. Now you can see that these set of instructions don't make much sense, okay, when you look at them for the first time. But this is how a computer works. You can take an example, let's say 4 or 9. The smaller the number, the lesser time it will take for you to manually do this. So you can take 4 for example and do these steps, and you will see that you will get the square root of 4 in box 2 finally. So here you can see some steps. For example, if box 4 contains 0, go to step 12. So from here, if it has 0, you jump to this step 12, and then you compare number in 3 and 1. If number in 3 is not greater than the number in 1, you go to step 2. So you can see it is like a loop. So again you start from 2, 3, 4, 5. You don't go to 13 after 12 directly. So after 2, 3, then again you go to 5. If box 4 contains 0, go to step 12. If it doesn't, just directly go to 6 after that. Then on 7 it says copy the number in 2 into box 5, then 8. If box 5 contains 0, go to step 5. So if it contains 0, you have to go to 5 again. So there are internal loops, as you can see. Okay. So until all these conditions are satisfied, and if the number in 3 is not greater than the number in 1, that is satisfied, then you go to step 13 and then you decrement the number in 2, what we discussed here basically, that square root of x is 1 less than the first number y with y squared greater than x. So we are following that definition, and we subtract the number in 2 after it satisfies this condition that the number in 3 is not greater than number in 1, and finally we get the square root of the number in box 1. Okay, but usually in higher level programming languages like C or MATLAB, there is directly a function for you to get the square root. Okay, you can write sqrt 4 and you will get the answer 2. But this example just shows that the computer is not actually, it doesn't actually know the square root of 4 directly. In the background, it follows these kinds of steps, okay, which are a combination of incrementing, decrementing, copying, shifting one bit into another, and so on. So these are the steps that are followed. It doesn't know how to multiply numbers, how to divide numbers. The most basic operations are these: incrementing, decrementing, and so on, even if you can call them basic, because it doesn't even know how to increment a number. It is our interpretation that if the voltage goes from 0 to 5 volts, call it an increment. Okay, that is our interpretation. Now I hope it is understood how a computer works, and we need to provide all the instructions to a computer. But because we'll be working with higher level programming languages, we don't need to go into so much detail and provide all the basic instructions to a computer. We will assume that in a higher programming language, we can provide instructions such as adding, subtracting, multiplying, taking a square root, giving some power to some number, okay, x to the power y, and so on. Okay. So if you learn MATLAB, for example, you have a script in MATLAB, and there you have many more constructs such as a loop, okay, for loop. So you can write something like for I equal to 1 to 10. So this colon means it will go from 1 to 10, and then you can say uh, xi equal to 1, for example, and then end the for loop. What this set of lines means is that x is an array and the ith element of that array will be equal to 1. So an array named x will be created in MATLAB. x1, x2, x3 and so on up to x10, and the values will be 1 1 1, all of them will be 1. If you want to do something more complex, you can say xi equal to I, and then what it will do is it will create an array with the first element as 1 because x1 is equal to 1. The second element x2 will be equal to 2. As you can see here, we are looping. This is a for loop. Okay, you can read about loops, for loop, while loop and so on. So this xi equal to I will create an array with the first element as 1, the next as 2, 3 up to 10. Okay, a 10 element array with natural numbers from 1 to 10. All right. So we'll assume these basic functions to be available to us. And then we'll start programming. Then we'll start giving instructions to a computer. Then it becomes relatively easy for us. Okay. Before going into all that, we will review a bit of fluid mechanics. Okay, for those of you who have not gone through the fluid mechanics course that I took last time or any other fluid mechanics course for that matter. So the first question, what is a fluid? What is a fluid? So many of you know this who attended the last course on fluid mechanics. A fluid is a substance that deforms continuously under shear force. What does this mean? What is a shear force? Let us see that. Okay, so if there is an object, let's say like this, it may be a fluid element or a solid or gas. So okay, both liquids and gases come under fluids. All right, so it can be a gas, liquid or solid. Now on a given surface of this element, if the force is acting perpendicular to the surface, let's say a force is acting on the top surface and it is acting perpendicular to the surface, then this is known as a normal force, and if a force is acting tangential to this surface, that is known as a shear force. So we are trying to shear this. Okay, so we are saying a fluid is something that deforms continuously under shear force. No matter what the magnitude of that shear force is, it deforms continuously. Let us take an example. Why not a normal force? Why only shear force? Let's say you have some water in a glass. Does it deform continuously? It doesn't. It stays as it is. If you tilt the glass, it deforms and then stays as it is after you stop tilting the glass. So it doesn't deform continuously under a normal force. What is the normal force here? You can see that there is this force mg acting on water due to gravity. M is the mass of water inside the glass. Okay, if you take the free body of this water substance here, now the glass is applying some force to keep it steady. That force is the reaction force from all the sides, okay, which is keeping the water in place. Okay, if you do a force balance, you will see what this force is. So obviously there is some force R acting on water, all right, and from the top also this atmospheric pressure is acting on the surface of water, and it is not moving. So definitely there is some normal force, but it is not moving. Now let's consider a situation where there is a shear force. Let's say there is a wall like this and there is a film of water. Now if you take any element inside this film, there will be mg acting downwards, and because of the friction from the wall, which is because of the no slip condition, so it is a property due to adhesion with wall, there is a force on this surface upwards. Let's call it the uh, friction force, okay, F. So you can see that there is shear. If you draw the free body diagram of water in this case, let's say this is the water film, the wall you have removed from here. So on this surface, this F is acting and mg is acting here, all right. So there is this F that is shearing this film, okay, from one side. It is acting tangential to that surface, so there is a shear force. In this case, you will notice, you can do experiments, you will notice that the film will continue to flow down. It will continuously deform, okay. So if you want to test whether something is a fluid or not, just apply a film, a coat on a wall and see if it moves continuously, okay. So we have discussed this in detail in the fluid mechanics course. We are not going to discuss this. That is a fluid. That's what we are going to study. Some properties of fluids we will write here. Density represented by rho. This is mass per unit volume. This most of you know. almost all of you maybe. Viscosity represented by mu. This is resistance to movement, okay, between the layers of the fluid. All right. Then there is surface tension. If there are multiple fluids in contact, this surface tension coefficient will be denoted by sigma, if at all we use it. All right. So this is what makes fluid drops or liquid drops in contact with air or any other immiscible liquid spherical, okay, in absence of gravity. So it tends to be spherical even in the presence of gravity. If the drops are very small, then they will be spherical. Then there can be more properties such as specific heat, okay, Cp we'll call it, thermal conductivity, okay, we can call it lambda, okay, and so on. There can be several properties related to fluid. In this course, what we'll use most are density and viscosity. Okay. Now coming to flows of fluids, they can be classified in several ways. The fluid flow can be laminar or turbulent. There is something called Reynolds number, which can be used to demarcate the boundary between laminar and turbulent flow. So if Re is greater than Re critical, the flow becomes turbulent. And this will be different for different geometries where the flow is occurring, for different fluids and so on. For different fluids, it may not be different, but for different geometries and situations, it may be different. Okay. So Reynolds number is rho v d by mu or rho v L by mu. Rho is density, v is velocity scale, d is diameter or length, mu is viscosity, as we discussed. Okay. We are not going to discuss any of this in detail. We'll just say that laminar flow is smooth. It looks smooth. All the streamlines join smoothly with one another. Okay. Let's say there is a body here, solid body, and there is fluid flow around it. Okay. Streamlines do not intersect with each other. So okay. So it will look like that. A turbulent flow looks very unsteady. It is unsteady. A turbulent flow is not steady. It looks chaotic. Okay. So if there is a body like this, the streamline may look like that. There may be swirls. Like that. Okay. In the flow. And basically there are several length scales in the flow, several velocity scales in case of a turbulent flow. All right, the next classification that we'll see is based on compressibility. So a flow may be compressible or incompressible. Basically this means that, let's say this is a patch of fluid that is moving inside the same fluid. So this boundary is imaginary that we have drawn. When it reaches some other position, uh, the density of that patch, let's say this is a very small patch, negligible in size, the density remains constant, then it means that it is incompressible. So a constant density flow where the density does not change with time is an incompressible flow. Okay, but a more clear comprehensive definition is that d rho by dt is equal to 0, that the total derivative of density is 0 with time. In a compressible flow, this is not valid. Density may change for a patch of fluid as it flows. Okay, an example of incompressible flow will be flow of water in river. Okay, flow of water in ocean. Okay, flow of a compressible kind will be flow around a re-entry vehicle, flow of air in rockets, rocket exhaust, and so on. So this is a re-entry vehicle. This is Earth, let's say. And after completing a mission or after a rocket launch, usually these days there are re-entry vehicles which come back to Earth. Okay. So the flow here, flow of air past this re-entry vehicle, it doesn't look like what I have drawn with the streamlines. This is just to show the flow of air past it. So you see some kind of a shock here. This is because of the compressible nature of the flow. This also will not discuss. If you are interested, you can read about shock waves for compressible flows. These are basically discontinuities in the flow across which the density, pressure, temperature, all of these are discontinuous. Suddenly they change, which does not happen for incompressible flows. Now classification based on viscosity can be done. Actually all the flows are viscous. Viscosity is there in all the fluids, but you can neglect it in some cases. So the flows may be called viscous and inviscid flows. Viscous flows and inviscid flows. Inviscid are those where viscosity can be neglected, and viscous are those where it cannot be. All right. Now we also discussed Newton's law of viscosity in the last class, in the last course, where we said that the shear stress is proportional to du by dy. This direction is y and the horizontal direction is x, and velocity is a function of y. Then the shear stress at any point is du by dy, and the proportionality constant is viscosity, du by dy. This is known as Newton's law of viscosity, and it is valid for many fluids like water, air, honey, and so on. All the Newtonian fluids, silicone oil, many oils also. It is not valid for, as the name suggests, non-Newtonian fluids. Tau is not proportional to not equal to mu du by dy. Okay, there is some different relationship between the gradient of u and tau for non-Newtonian fluids. This is known as Newton's law of viscosity. And the fluids that follow this law are known as Newtonian fluids. The examples are air, water, and many common fluids. Some oils also, silicone oil, honey, and so on. Examples of non-Newtonian fluids are toothpaste, shampoo, commonly used shampoos. Blood is also non-Newtonian. Paints are non-Newtonian. Cornstarch solution, that is non-Newtonian. All right. And then we discussed about continuum hypothesis. This we also discussed in the first lecture. Okay. So this is all for today. We'll see the equations of fluid mechanics in the next class. Some more fluid mechanics, then we'll start with how to solve the equations governing fluid mechanics. Thank you.